daughter of Demeter, the Greek goddess of crops, and Zeus, the supreme ruler of the heavens, Persephone was abducted by her uncle Hades, ruler of the underworld, who she would one day marry. As wife of Hades, Persephone presides over the passage from life to death and rules the kingdom of the dead. Using her sickle, she harvests the souls of the damned and collects them in her cauldron. What's up, guys, and welcome to another GODFORGE video. That intro that you saw there was courtesy of the Fateless team, who delivered unto us an image to present to you guys for the first time. Moving forward, the Fateless team is going to allow us, the content creators, to present you with new information leaks every Friday. So make sure you tune in to your favorite content creator every week, this guy, for exclusive sneak peeks at new heroes to come. With all that out of the way, let's jump into today's video. Let's take a look at Anubis and his skill kit. Let's start with his basic ability, Soul Guide. It attacks one enemy, dealing 250% attack and 15% max HP. If the enemy dies, has a 35% chance to place fear for one turn on all other enemies. Now, what can we glean from this? Well, first of all, his damage scales off attack and max HP, which is similar to what we see from Hercules. And Hercules and Anubis are each of the brawler classification, leading me to believe that this is going to be a very common motif we see amongst brawler heroes. Furthermore, we see a chance of placing fear for one turn on all surviving enemies. Now, in Raid Shadow Legends, we know fear as being a crowd control debuff, and we also know that based on what we've seen in the past, debuffs that appear in purple are also crowd control debuffs. So this fear appears to be some sort of crowd control. We don't know the exact details, but I'm a little worried. In the Fateless podcast episode where they're discussing RNG, Brad mentions that he believes the fear debuff as it exists in Raid Shadow Legends is a good example of bad RNG, because it's literally a coin flip. Like, you use the attack, or you go to take your turn, and there's a 50% chance that your turn gets skipped, and it puts your skill on cooldown, which it's extremely punishing, and it's a 50-50. It's like a win or lose right there on the spot. So I'm really hoping that, and he goes on to say he wishes that the fear debuff in Raid was less impactful and more consistent rather than this 50-50, win or lose the game right there on the spot. So I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that they implement fear in their game in a much different way, more in line with what Brad himself was suggesting. So fingers crossed that's what we get. Who knows? We won't know until the game's out, or at least the very least the beta stage, so we can get in there and start testing things. Next, we have his core ability, Embalming Blast. Attacks all enemies with 200% attack plus 20% max HP. Has a 75% chance to place Corrupt and Initiative down for 2 turns. Again, we can see the Corrupt debuff in purple, indicating it's some form of crowd control. Exactly what this could mean, I don't know. However, a fellow GODFORGE content creator, Ragewood, has his own theory. I watched his video and I actually found it pretty compelling, and I believe he might be onto something. So if you want to see what he thinks about it, check out his Anubis guide, or Anubis breakdown video, where he talks about his theory. I won't steal his thunder. I'll let you go check out his video on that. I think he's onto something with his theory on Corrupt. But Initiative down. Now let's talk about this. It is current speculation from many people that Initiative down has something to do with reducing speed or a champion's turn order in the indicator that appears on the left side of the screen when we look at the demo. Hell Hades himself has confirmed that is indeed not what Initiative down does, which leads me to wonder, what does it mean? Well, if it's not affecting your speed, and it's not affecting your turn order, the only other thing I can think of that it means is that initiative is the metric that determines the rate at which you gain divinity. And the divinity is the sort of like ultimate charge system. Once you get enough divinity, you can then use your ultimate. I think Initiative down is going to decrease the rate at which the enemy with this debuff gains ultimate charge, which is actually a pretty powerful debuff if that is the case. Let me know what you think. Do you think I'm onto something with this theory, or do you think I'm talking crazy? That's the only other thing I could think of, is it's tied to divinity gain and ultimate charge. Speaking of ultimate charge, his ultimate is Weigh the Scales. Attacks all enemies with 200% attack and 15% max HP. Has a 35% chance to place Drain 2 for 2 turns. Repeat this attack on enemies with less than 50% divinity. And then it has this other feature, gain 200 divinity whenever an enemy dies. Gain 300 additional divinity if they were killed by Soul Guide, which is his primary skill, Soul Guide here. So if he kills someone with his primary skill, he gains 300 divinity instead of 200. It says cooldown 999 turns. I'm assuming that's not actually the real cooldown. This is probably something that needs to be tweaked. I'm wondering if there is no cooldown on it. And maybe it's like a 0-turn cooldown. He could just pop off and do this as many times as he likes. I don't know. Now let's look at Drain 2. It appears to be these sort of like blood droplets, which would make it, which initially makes me think of Leech as we know it in Raid Shadow Legends. But it looks like there's 2 levels to it if that's the case. So this, could be some sort of lifesteal. It makes sense. Like Drain, if you're draining your enemies, you deal damage to them and you gain that much HP back for yourself. That's actually pretty cool. And it fits in line with what we see from brawlers. The other brawler we know, Hercules, has this passive max HP gaining feature in his kit where he's constantly gaining more HP until he gains 60% more max HP. That's sort of his built-in survivability kit. Drain 2 appears to be Anubis's sort of self-sustain survivability built into his kit. He's life draining from the enemies when he attacks them. That's sort of the built-in sustain feature in his kit to help keep him alive. I think that's also what contributes to him being a brawler class. And then lastly, we have his passive Tomb Watcher. Gain 20% turn meter whenever any unit dies, including his own or his team or the enemy team as well. So anytime anyone dies, 20% turn meter. That's actually really strong. All right, now let's take a look at the skills of Aphrodite. We're going to look at her skills in a slightly different order than we might normally do so, just because I think if we do it this way, it makes it a little bit more easier to grasp all the synergies that are going on in her kit. It makes it much easier to see how powerful she really is. So let's look at her passive first, Eternal Bonds. Allies under Speed Up 2 and Initiative Up 2 gain 20% more healing, turn meter, and deal 20% more damage. That is a very, very strong passive, particularly the 20% more damage aspect. Now this is her core ability, the skill with a cooldown. Divine Sacrament. Target an ally, placing Speed Up 2 and Initiative Up 2 for 3 turns, then grants an extra turn. So whoever she targets with this skill will gain extra juice from her passive. I'm still of the opinion that initiative is the metric that determines the rate at which you gain ultimate charge. So placing initiative up for 2 turns on your damage dealer means they're going to get to that big ultimate damage dealing skill faster, and because they have Speed Up 2, they're going to get more turn meter to get back to their other skills faster as well. That to me sounds like an insanely powerful support ability, especially when combined with their passive to allow them to deal an extra 20% damage and get 20% extra turn meter from turn meter gain effects. Speaking of turn meter gain effects, let's look at her A1, her basic attack. Attacks an enemy with 300% attack, increases the turn meter of allies under Speed Up 2 and Initiative Up 2 by 10%. After attacking, places Speed Up 2 for 1 turn on this hero. So whoever she targets with her A2 will then get turn meter boosted by her A1, which is sort of compounded by the passive that gains additional turn meter boosting. To me, Aphrodite seems like a very, very, very powerful support champion. And this leads me to believe that the Invoker class that we see, her labeled as, is the support class. So we know Brawler are tanky, sort of melee DPS, or melee damage dealers meant to have sustain over just raw damage. We know that the Slayer are the glass cannon all-out damage classes. We know that the Defenders are sort of tanky supports that protect their allies via buffs. And now we know that the Invoker is the support class. So the only thing left we have to uncover is what is the Disruptor. And my current line of belief is that it has something to do with crowd control, but until we actually see some actual evidence, that's just pure speculation. I have no facts to base this claim upon. But I do think it's very likely that Invoker is indeed the support class. Now let's look at her ultimate. Attacks all enemies with 400% attack, It will place Confuse for 2 turns on enemies whose resistance is equal to or lower than this hero's accuracy. Places a Stun for 1 turn on enemies whose resistance is equal to or greater than this hero's accuracy. The stun cannot be resisted. If a Confuse or Stun disable is resisted or blocked, decrease that enemy's turn meter by 25%. Gain 50 divinity when placing a buff on an ally. So whenever she uses her A2, she's going to gain 100 divinity because she places 2 buffs. And then whenever she uses her A1, she places a buff upon herself, i.e. speed up 2, so she'll gain another 50 divinity, at least 50 divinity, up to 100 every turn whenever she uses her skills. And as we saw before, this motif of crowd control debuffs appearing in purple continues through Aphrodite's kit. Now let's look at this keyword right here. It's not highlighted, so it's easy to miss. So if a Confuse or Stun disable is resisted or blocked, this is either a typo and it's meant to say debuff. Either that or disable is a keyword to indicate a crowd control debuff. And if this is in fact a keyword to describe a crowd control debuff such as Confuse or Stun, we might see this being used on mastery trees. There might be a mastery that reads something to the effect of increases the chance of placing disable effects by X%, or whenever an enemy has a disable effect placed upon them, they receive 5% more damage for that kind of thing. So I think this is something we need to keep an eye out for in the future. And then on top of all of that, she's got this really nice ally accuracy by 60 in all battles. Now with this, what we can learn from Aphrodite's kit is that there's going to be some form of accuracy mechanic in the game as well as a resistance. Now, I was watching Mad Capper's video, and he went on a little bit of a rant about the 3% rule. And rightfully so. It's a very frustrating mechanic to have to deal with at times. But it says, places Confuse for 2 turns on enemies whose resistance is equal to or less than this hero's accuracy. If their resistance is less than your accuracy, there's no reason that it should be resisted or blocked. So maybe this is just a redundancy. They're lumping these in together so they don't have to make 2 sentences to describe what happens, because the stun could potentially places stun for... No, actually, it says it can't be resisted. Places stun for 1 turn on enemies whose resistance is equal or greater to this hero's accuracy. So if if their resistance is higher than your accuracy, the stun can't be resisted. Interesting. The stun cannot be resisted. So if a Confuse or Stun disable is resisted or blocked, decrease that enemy's turn meter by 25%. So maybe Confuse could be resisted, but if their resistance is equal to or maybe if it's tied, there's a chance that they could resist. Maybe that's what it's implying. This may not necessarily be evidence of the presence of a 3% rule. This could just be if their resistance is equal to the accuracy, they have a chance to resist. But if your accuracy is higher, then it won't. So on the off chance they have the exact same resistance as your accuracy, it's possible that they resist it. And if that's the case, it will reduce their turn meter by 25%. So it will try to place Confuse if they're the same or lower. And if they're the same, it could resist. I think that's pretty interesting. There's a lot of information to glean from this one skill, and it gives us a lot of information about what we can expect about in GODFORGE in the future. All right, now let's look at King Arthur. I almost called him King Arthas, but that's a totally different dude. Let's look at King Arthur. His base, he's a defender, so keep that in mind as we go through his kit. His basic ability is Loyal Strike. It attacks an enemy with 150% defense and 75% attack. I actually like that the defenders do damage based off defense and attack, because it means that when you place an increased attack on your defenders, they're actually getting some value. May not get as much value from it as like a Slayer, like Zeus, for example, or Musashi, but they're still going to get some value from that increased attack buff. I think that's really important. That's something to keep in mind. And it also has a 50% chance to place Taunt. Again, some sort of crowd control debuff. I'm assuming the equivalent of what we know to be Provoke in Raid Shadow Legends. Or in World of Warcraft, when you taunt an enemy, they are forced to attack you for 6 seconds. I think that's more what they're drawing inspiration from with this Taunt. And then it places an Intercept buff for 1 turn on a random ally. Now, we don't know exactly what intercept is, but I'm assuming, based on context clues, that intercept will like literally intercept the attack. If an enemy is going to be or an ally is going to be attacked, he sort of redirects. Look at the tooltip here. It's literally an arrow. It looks like a ricochet. I'm assuming it redirects the damage to Arthur instead of the ally that would be attacked. Again, playing into the defender role. Now, his core ability, Excalibur's Call, attacks all enemies with 200% defense and 100% attack. Has a 75% chance to place attack down 2 for 2 turns. Increases the defense of all Avalon allies by 10%, stacking up to 30%. I think this is the first instance we see of Faction Matters abilities in a champion's kit. I think that's really cool. So if you have the only other Avalonian that we know of for sure, at least that we've seen in the demo client, is the Brucilian Archer. So if you have her on your team, she will gain an additional 10% defense every time Arthur uses Excalibur's Call. Now let's look at his ultimate, King's Oath. Places Retaliate for 2 turns on this hero. Places Immortal for 2 turns on allies with higher defense than attack. Places Vanish for 2 turns on allies with higher attack than defense. Gain 100 divinity when this hero counterattacks. So I believe, just based on the context here, I'm assuming Retaliate is the counterattack buff. It makes sense, right? You're retaliating. You're counterattacking. So yeah, that's really cool. So if there's like 3 enemies on the wave that you're fighting, and they all have AOE attacks, and they hit, he'll retaliate. He'll get hit again, retaliate, retaliate. So he's gaining 100 divinity every time he counterattacks. That's really, really cool. And then Immortal, we don't know exactly what this means. I'm assuming it's some sort of unkillable or block damage equivalent. But this is actually really neat because it synergizes with Hercules. If Hercules is under an Immortal buff, his Herc Smash ability deals double damage. So Hercules and King Arthur could be a very powerful combination, or to run in tandem. And then Vanish, I'm assuming, there's an eyeball here. I'm assuming it's similar to like going into stealth like we see in World of Warcraft. Or maybe you could compare this to the Veil or Perfect Veil buff we see in Raid Shadow Legends. I think it's a similar concept that will hide allies and maybe even reduce incoming damage they take from AoE attacks. Something like that to protect the squishy attack-based champions. The one caveat with this is you would have to make if you were to pair King Arthur with Hercules, you'd have to make sure that Hercules has higher defense than attack, which Hercules' damage scales off HP and attack. So you could scale his max HP as high as possible and give him enough attack that he still does damage, but make sure his defense is higher. It might be kind of hard to pull off, but if he's dealing double damage, then it might be worth the slight sacrifice and the initial lack of stats. It could be something to experiment with. We won't know for sure until we actually get in there and try it out. Anyway, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. A special shout out to my legendary tier channel member, Dex, for your continued support. Let me know what you guys think about these champions. What do you think about my theories? Let me know all of it in the comments below. I'd really love to hear your input. Do you think I'm onto something here, or do you think I got it wrong? And if I did get it wrong, what do you think? I really want to help. I really would like to help figure all this stuff out. So your input is highly valuable to me because I definitely don't know everything. So please let me know in the comments. But anyway, that's going to do it for me, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Hopefully, I will see you all in another video soon. But until next time, everyone, take care.